Hi, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Josh Feit. I'm class of 2003, and I'm a corporate lawyer in New York after earlier career stops as an equity analyst, a Las Vegas restaurant manager, and a cheesemonger. Another important note about me, my favorite snack bar order at Williams was mozzarella sticks, close second, bagel, egg, and cheese. So we're all excited to speak with you today with some ideas on how to effectively navigate the legal job market and continue to develop your career and skills, even if because of this pandemic, you're limited to doing so entirely from your own home. So joining me for that conversation are my fellow moderator, Joe Gallagher, as well as esteemed panelists, Jana Rearick, Justin Relaford, Joe Lucia, and Emma Purdy, who will introduce themselves in a moment just before we get on with the show. Joe? Joe, I think you may be muted.
I officially won the You're on Mute award for the day. I did not think it would be delivered this early. So, hi everyone. I'm Joe Gallagher. I'm also class of 2003, and like Josh, I'm also a fan of the snack bars mozzarella sticks. I'm a litigation lawyer in New York. I got my start at a big firm, went to an even bigger firm after that, and now I'm a partner at a small litigation boutique on Wall Street. And we're here to give the benefit of our knowledge and experience to all of you. Our plan for the next hour is to touch on a few topics with each of our panelists, followed by some time at the end for Q&A from you. Now, with that in mind, just a few logistical things to go over for the next hour or so. If you have any questions during the talk, you can submit them anytime during the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Just type it in and it'll go into the question queue that Josh and I can look at. And at the very end, we'll answer as many of those questions as we can. Secondly, there's also another function at the bottom of your screen called the chat function. It's your space to engage with the community and share your reflections. Remember, you can select to all panelists and attendees, which you should do to make sure that your comment is seen by everyone. And then we can make sure that we are engaging with everybody here. Now on to the people you actually logged in today to listen to. I think everybody's screen is essentially the same as mine. So I'll start sort of in the middle row in the left-hand side of the screen with Justin. Now, Justin, starting with you, can you give your name, class, year, and favorite snack bar item?
Sure. Justin Relaford, also class of 2003. By far, Nantucket Nectars, which I'll be honest, I have not drank since 2003. My favorite snack bar item. I'm a partner at Kessler Topaz, Meltzer, and Czech. That's a class action litigation boutique here in Radnor, PA. And my practice focuses on corporate fiduciary litigation and securities fraud.
Great. Emma, are you next?
Hi, I'm Emma Purdy, formerly Emma Harries, also class of 03, and was in the same entry, Williams B, as Joe Lucia and Josh Feit. My favorite snack bar item was definitely mozzarella sticks, although, you know, Josh and Joe really like them too. I guess the veggie sandwich or veggie pocket was my close second, but that's not very exciting. Currently, I work in-house. I'm VP and Deputy General Counsel of Penumbra, which is a publicly traded medical device company. Jana, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Emma. Jana Rearick, I'm the sole representative today from the class of 02. And I had to actually reach out to my girlfriends to remember the name of my favorite snack bar item. I think we agreed it's the Bagel Supreme, but it might be the Breakfast Supreme. There was a little bit of dispute about what the actual name was. Anyway, I'm in-house counsel at Unum Group, which is a Fortune 500 insurance company focusing on employee benefits, and currently live in the Portland, Maine area after about a decade in New York in various legal roles. Let's see who's next. Does that leave Joe?
Last but not least.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Lucia. I'm also a member of the class of 2003. My favorite snack bar item was definitely something more frozen, something more frosty. I don't remember the name of it, but it was essentially a milkshake. It was like a mint chocolate chip milkshake situation. It was delicious. I spent some time in the private sector here in Boston, but now work as an assistant attorney general with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, and therefore am the sole representative on the panel today from the government sector.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, why don't we roll right into the panel discussion? So as advertised, first topic, main overall topic is just how has everybody gotten everything done this past year? You know, connecting with colleagues, networking, doing real work when you're doing it all virtually. What have been the big challenges? What have been big things that you thought might have been a big deal, but actually turned out fine, unexpected successes? Maybe Justin and Jana, do you want to field this one?
Sure, Justin, why don't you kick it off?
Well, since you beat me to saying that, I wouldn't have to. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge has been really improving the lines of communication. I work at a relatively small practice group, a relatively small size firm, about 100 attorneys big, a little over that. But we speak a lot in the office, and a lot is done in passing, a lot is done in the hallways. And that's where a lot of the mentoring and development for younger associates happens, not necessarily on case teams, maybe in passing in a conversation that, you know, interesting legal topic. A lot is done around the lunchroom in my office. So keeping those lines of communication up and keeping sort of what makes sort of our firm culture, I think has been the biggest challenge. And it has meant a lot of Zoom calls. And I will be honest, I was very excited about Zoom when I thought every Zoom call ended after 40 minutes. I found out you could buy a subscription. That's not true. I got less happy about Zoom. The pendulum's now swinging back. I'm enjoying Zoom more. But the most important thing, I think, for everybody is keeping those lines of communications open. So for my one piece of advice for any of the younger associates here, it's make sure that you're getting your questions asked and answered by the people that you're working with. Making sure everybody's rowing the boat in the right direction. Everybody knows what's going on. It's a hard task already. It's made harder by the pandemic. But being proactive, reaching out. I remember being at a big firm, sort of playing the hide by the partner's door game, where you sort of casually stand just within feet of the partner's door and hope maybe he catches you or she catches you with the eye and you can finally say something. And that's not happening these days. Like, you got to pick up the phone, you got to send an email, you got to ask. So I think that's the biggest challenge and something that we'll have to face going forward.
Thanks, Justin. Jana, what do you think? Is there anything you might add there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Justin's points are really good ones. You know, trying the biggest surprise, I think, in terms of challenges from the pandemic for me was something that Justin touched on, which is trying to replicate those hallway and lunchroom conversations and relationships, because everyone can handle, you know, you just switch your meetings to your formal meetings to a virtual environment. That's not a huge deal, but trying to create the networking and the relationship building that occurs sort of organically in an office environment is a little bit different. So I would say two things about that. And again, kind of echoing what Justin said. And one is just ensuring visibility. And what I mean by that is, you know, a couple of things. One, just like literally be visible and turn your camera on. So, you know, I've had meetings with direct reports of mine where someone just doesn't turn their camera on, and it just sends a weird message. Like, no matter how bad your hair is, or, you know, how embarrassed you are of your cat, I just think the way that you can build those relationships is just being actually physically visible. And then again, to Justin's point of sort of being proactive, you can schedule those coffee meetings, even if you're not working on a project together. And I've found personally that people are really receptive to that and are happy to get on, you know, a 15-minute, 30-minute call, just even if you're not working with them, and it's always valuable. So yeah, just ensuring that visibility and those open channels of communication beyond the scheduled formal meetings on your calendar.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've heard a lot of the same things from people in my firm too, that, you know, reach out and people will be happy to hear from you, you know, even if they're not necessarily reaching out to you first. You know, Justin's coming from a smaller firm, now started in big law. You know, Jana, in-house now, started in big law. I think a lot of people think you go to law school, the only outlet when you graduate is to go to big law, right? And I think now more than ever, one of the things we all talked about is that's not necessarily your only option. There's a lot of other options. So, Joe, Lucia, I think maybe you're a great person to talk to next in terms of a couple other things that people could think about in terms of finding employment, whether it's clerkships, government sector stuff. You want to jump in and touch on a few of those?
Sure. Yeah. So, if you're in law school currently and you're trying to figure out what's my first step into this legal industry, where do I start? And you're having difficulty getting any traction in the big law sort of world, I definitely think clerkships are a really great option. Clerkships, while generally speaking are great options for people thinking about litigation jobs, also are not a bad option if you're even thinking about going into a transactional practice. I definitely know folks that have done clerkships, pretty prestigious clerkships, and then gone into sort of doing transactional work. So it's certainly an option for everybody, no matter what your career path may be. I think of clerkships really as a good option if you're trying to sort of put your legal career on hold for a moment. It doesn't do a disservice to your long-term trajectory to do a clerkship. So whether you're sort of getting cold feet like I did about starting in big law right away, or you're sort of finding yourself a victim of this pandemic and you don't really have another job opportunity, a clerkship is a really great way to build your resume with a really impressive sort of job that you can say that you've done for a year or two. But it also has some really great benefits aside from being a resume builder. You really get an opportunity to observe the practice of law, like I say, for a year or two, without having that pressure of practicing it yourself. For me, it was a really great confidence builder. I was able to watch attorneys in practice in a courtroom, doing their thing. And it was a really great reality check about what the real expectations of a litigator were. To that point, I had really only seen litigators on TV and in the movies. And I thought, I'm not nearly that polished. I'm not nearly that perfect. And then you actually see real lawyers doing real law, and you're like, oh, if that's all I'm expected to do, I think I can handle this. So it's a really great reality check for like what the real practice of law looks like. You also get to develop a great mentor relationship with a judge, which I think will come in handy down the line if you're planning a litigation career, especially. My mentor relationship with my judge on the appeals court of Massachusetts has really come in handy when I was applying for my job at the AG's office. To get a phone call from a sitting judge on an appellate court that says, I really love, this guy and the work that he did for me, can only help you. So definitely think about clerkships. Another great opportunity if you're transitioning out of law school today and you're kind of worried about where you're going to land, a lesser known option is something called a fellowship. There are a lot of government sector agencies that have fellowships, which are kind of time limited. They might be for a year or two. But a fellowship is a great opportunity if you're coming straight out of law school, because to be honest, some of these fellowship opportunities are really only available to folks with no legal practice experience. I can tell you, for example, at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, we do offer a fellowship, which is a 2-year position. It is paid, which is a nice thing to hear in connection with a fellowship or an internship. Generally, those are dicey as to whether you get paid for those. But this is a paid fellowship where you rotate through a bunch of different divisions in the office and you learn a bunch of different skill sets and then get exposure to a bunch of different areas of law. And again, like I say, it's an opportunity specifically intended for the youngest of lawyers among us. So you're not going to have competition from folks that have had 5 and 10 years of experience for these fellowships. So, something, that is really geared toward the newbies among us. So again, a great opportunity if you're finding, it difficult to get your first job in legal practice. Consider contacting some government agencies, in your state and inquiring about whether they have potential fellowship opportunities that you might be able to do. So fellowships and clerkships are great opportunities, great resume builders, and certainly an alternative way to getting your career started.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think we can definitely see that that pathway worked really well for you. So if people can follow in your footsteps, they won't be doing too bad for themselves either. Another option that we'd love to touch on is going in-house, which is something that not everybody thinks about, as top of mind when you're graduating law school either. And, Emma, I think for you, that's turned out to be a really successful and satisfying way to go. Would you be able to give us a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. Thanks, Josh. I think just in terms of talking about opportunities right out of law school, going in-house isn't too common right after you graduate. Now, having hired lawyers for about 5 years in my role, my favorite attorneys are the ones who have worked for a couple of years at law firms, no matter what the size. And I have a strong preference for people who worked as paralegals prior to law school. There's a strong skill set you develop when you work as a paralegal, particularly at a big firm. And then I think there's really great training that can come from working as a junior associate at a law firm. And I think big law has with it the sort of pedigree and cachet on your resume that makes you a simple hire, or at least sort of simple to get into the door. But I think some of the best training, and maybe I'm a little biased here, comes from the smaller and mid-sized law firms where you're working directly with sort of the name partner on a variety of matters. And if there's a varied practice at your firm, you're working one day on litigation, you're working one day on a merger, you can get really in-depth hands-on experience early on in your career. So I think that can be really valuable. But a lot of times, in-house opportunities do come up, as well as I know there are a couple of opportunities with DOJ and SEC that you can apply for as you're graduating during your 3L year, which is great experience either before you go into big law or often, for us as a medical device manufacturer, anyone who worked at FDA for a couple of years is highly attractive to then bring in-house. But I think, in-house opportunities really vary. So it's really good to talk to the lawyers who you might be working with and get a real feel for, if you're working at Google or Apple, you're kind of working at a law firm within a company. If you're working at a smaller company or just a company that doesn't maybe have as many legal needs, you'll be doing a lot of different things. So those opportunities just are quite diverse, and it's good to get a sense what they are before you head in-house.
Could I jump in and just add to something Emma mentioned?
Yeah.
So, I think it's absolutely right that the most common path is to go from a law firm in-house, and that's what I did as well. But I did just want to mention that it's not necessary that you stick with the same type of practice of law that you did in the firm. And I guess, so Emma kind of touched on this too, in terms of getting a wide variety of experiences and a wide variety of work if you can, and I would echo that. But just wanted to mention that personally, I started as a litigator at a big firm in New York, and when I went in-house, I was not doing litigation, and I was in a role that I had zero experience with previously. So don't think that just because you start in one type of practice area that you can't then transition into something new. You absolutely can, and I think it's just a matter of being open about what you're looking for and talking to people to try to see where the opportunities might be in that new area.
Josh, if I may, just
Yeah.
building off of these points, I think one piece of advice I wish I had right around the time I was transitioning between my first and second job was don't panic and don't chase a paycheck. All right, and I think both Emma and Jana's comments here really speak to that. Right, you have to take the time to figure out what you want to do. There's some introspection that goes along with taking agency over your career, and it begins with asking, what do I like about what I'm doing? What don't I like about what I'm doing? And then the next step is to find other people and ask them, what do you like about what you do and what don't you like? When I made the move out of sort of my big law firm, I was working with a headhunter. I had met with, a lot of the firms here in Philadelphia where I had a lot of connections. There were well-trodden paths to go to another firm or to go in-house. And I realized that a lot of those things were going to lead me back to some of the things I was looking to get away from. And I had to take sort of the effort to expand my network, to reach out to people who were across the V for me, to reach out to people at different firms in different areas. And I remember meeting with people that did everything from med mal to construction litigation, mass torts, to labor and employment, which was what I did sort of on the defense side going forward. And it was in that process that I think I found sort of what I thought would be the next best step for me. And it took me a while. And so don't panic. It may take a while. It may take a while, especially now, during COVID, but the biggest thing I did was something that's really easy to do, particularly now. I reached out to 2 Williams alum, George Anthus and Roy Smith, who were both doing plaintiff side litigation here in Philadelphia. We had connections, and I sat with them at lunch and asked them about their life, their practice. And I think that was really what clinched the deal for me in sort of changing the direction that I was looking at. So again, just tap into your network, look where the overlaps are, but really take the time to figure out where your next step is going to bring you the most happiness and professional fulfillment.
Justin, I think that's entirely right, and I agree with everything that you just said. One of the things in my own experience that law school does not prepare you for is how to actually choose what type of law you want to practice, because the 1L curriculum is mostly set for litigation-focused material. And you can choose to do some transactional stuff later on, but you don't nearly have the freedom or even the course availability to specialize if you want to. And there might even be institutional pressure not to do that. So if, Justin just put a whole bunch of very useful information out into this webinar, but if you take nothing else from it, from my own perspective, it would be talk to as many people as you can in as many different areas of the law as you can. Now that said, so that sort of transitions into the next general topic area that we were all hoping to cover on this webinar, which is, how do you actually get a job? What do you do, and how do you operationalize everything that we're talking about here? What is a realistic opportunity for you, given your biography, your CV, your place in life, your interests? How can you use forums like LinkedIn, like an alumni network, to get those job opportunities? How do you write a good cover letter or resume? And these are all things that you could take entire courses and degrees on. And so we're just going to try to give you some food for thought, but this is also one of those areas where I'm going to actively encourage everyone who's listening here to reach out to people on this panel if anything we say sparks specific interest, and we're happy to follow up with. But just to kick off the conversation, I think Emma has some really interesting insight that she could give us about her career path. Emma?
So, yeah, all of that really resounds with me. And I know the one question I would have if I was kind of just graduated from Williams or sort of a 1L is, yeah, I always hear about networking, but how do I do that? How do I set about it? How do I build my network? I know LinkedIn is such an amazing tool that kind of builds your network in a kind of social media-esque way. But I do think one thing that I've learned, I worked as a paralegal after law school and also did a couple of other things before committing to going to law school. And I connected with people and I stayed in touch. I sent emails on a regular basis. It wasn't something that I put in my calendar, but at least once or twice a year, I just tried to send an email to a couple of the attorneys that I worked with when I was a paralegal at Cravath. The owner of the restaurant that I worked at before committing to law school when I wanted to go spend a year skiing and working in the restaurant industry. And those relationships have really been helpful. When I graduated, it was really the bottom of the recession, bottom of 2009, early 2010. There weren't a lot of jobs out there. Law firms were canceling their summer programs, and so I really had to hustle. And I sort of networked my way into my first job as working at a small firm, and then used some contacts to find a position at another slightly larger firm. And then my husband got a position at Apple. And so we moved to California, and that was where I really had to network, because then I had my New York City network of attorneys, and all of a sudden I have to find my San Francisco network. Luckily, I'd gone to law school here, and my corporate governance professor is someone that I stayed in touch with after law school. And he sat down with me and basically opened his list of contacts to me and said, who do you want to talk to? Sent out a flurry of emails connecting me to all of his contacts. I had lunches, I had coffees, all things that can be done virtually. I probably met with 30 different lawyers in the Bay Area. And I didn't end up getting my first in-house role through any of that. I ended up finding a job on Indeed that I applied for, which is the pharma company I worked at before this. But it certainly helped me. Having those conversations, there's really nothing to gain from it but insight. Tell me about what you do. Be curious, be excited, be friendly. And that's it. You know, you're not applying for a job, so the pressure is off. You can just have those conversations and then follow up with a thank you note. And then when I got my job at the pharma company that I worked at, I wrote every single one of them an email and said, thanks so much. The time you spent with me was incredibly valuable. I found this amazing opportunity. And not everyone replied, but I'm connected with every one of them on LinkedIn. And sometimes they have come to me and now said, hey, I see at your next company, you're looking to hire someone. I have a great candidate for you. And it's just that kind of rolling, it just, your network kind of snowballs. And all of a sudden, everyone who you were kind of asking for advice from, all of a sudden they start asking you for advice and favors. And that's just, it's really great to kind of have a collaborative group like that. And while the Williams network is incredibly strong, you know, I think it is a bit stronger on the East Coast. Whenever I see a Williams alum out here, I kind of grab on and want to talk to them. But, you know, you can build your network from anyone, past employers, past colleagues. The bigger, the better. And it doesn't even take that much effort to keep it going.
Emma, I think that's absolutely wonderful. One thing I just want to underscore from what you said, and this is just coming from my own experience, don't be like I was in college and think that networking is a dirty word or some sort of a cheat code. We, you know, as Williams alums, and I think this is a psychology that's reinforced in law school and in certain parts of the law, you think that everything is a logical meritocracy. And in some ways it is. You know, you have to make logical, rational arguments if you're going to win in court or get a deal done. But so much of law that they don't teach you in a formal setting is it's a business. It is, you know, you're trying to get people to give you money for providing a service. And they have to like you to be able to do that. And they have to know who you are. So taking a page out of Emma's book, and which reads like a primer on best practices for networking, is super valuable for, I think, everyone to do. But the next thing that this leads into, I think, from our perspective, since a lot of us are now in the position where we have some influence on hiring decisions and strategy in our respective organizations, is diversity and inclusion in law. Because that is one of the biggest things that the legal industry as a whole is talking about right now and trying to find ways to improve. So I think at first, you know, Jana, if I can volunteer you, I think you had some thoughts on this that you'd be happy to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. And I just also wanted to just reinforce the networking point. In my own career, I've made 2 job transitions from big law. The first was to go in-house, and the second was to move from the New York market to the Portland, Maine market. And in both cases, I sent off a bunch of resumes and I got my jobs through networks and connections. But I wanted to stress on that point that it wasn't necessarily people that I thought were a strong network for me. So in the law firm, the transition from law firm to in-house initially, I actually left my law firm job without having another job lined up. I just made the decision that I didn't want to be in the firm anymore. And, you know, law is a really conservative profession, so it can be tough sometimes to explain a decision like that. But it ended up working out totally fine for me, but just because I was really open in talking about it and like, here's why I'm doing this. And so folks were happy to help and kind of set me up with contacts. And I got my job pretty quickly. I think it was like a month and a half through just a friend of a friend of a friend. Not a close person who I would even have considered part of my network. And then again, coming from New York to Maine, similar to Emma, moving to the West Coast and not having a strong network there. You know, I didn't know anyone in Maine, and a friend of a friend of a friend kind of went to bat for me and gave me a name of someone to call. And I cold called that person and said, hey, I'm interested in transitioning to this legal market, and it worked out. So I would say just don't be shy, and don't necessarily think it's like, oh, I only know I only have 10 friends, close friends who are practicing law. That's my network. It's like, it's kind of big and surprising. So you just have to be willing to just be chatty and open about what you want. But anyway, that was the segue. So on diversity inclusion, so we were talking about, obviously it's been a big year for that topic. Maybe long overdue, but we were talking about sort of what are some of the advantages or what are some of the challenges that the pandemic has presented on the D&I front. And I think some folks on the call can share some of the good things and the advantages that have come out of this year. I wanted to flag something that is maybe less positive that I've seen. So in the position of hiring both lawyers and non-lawyers at my current company, in the pandemic, we've been doing those interviews virtually, and you're in a different environment with the candidates. You're seeing in many cases the insides of their homes and just their more intimate environments. And so I think that can really be a trigger for folks' implicit biases, which we all hear about and we all strive to overcome, obviously. But I think it's just another challenge that's presented itself in the pandemic, where you're seeing folks not just in a sterile conference room, but you're seeing more of them. So I think that's just something to be aware of, whether you're in the hiring seat or the interviewing seat. And I would say, even simple things like the opposite of what I'm doing now, but sort of blurring your background or putting up like Josh has the bridges behind him, sort of anything you can do to kind of neutralize your environment might help you to be seen as the candidate you are, rather than distracting folks with your home environment. So I would just say that on the D&I front, I think, there are potentially some challenges, but also some really great stuff that's happening that I know others have thoughts on. So let me stop there.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here real quick about the D&I stuff from a government sector perspective, I can tell you that, the Attorney General's Office of Massachusetts has always had a diversity and inclusion committee, always focused on both the recruitment and the retention of lawyers with diverse backgrounds. And interestingly now, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on all of its job postings sort of has an explicit statement that lawyers with diverse backgrounds are encouraged to apply. So certainly there's still a big push to recruit and retain lawyers with diverse backgrounds. What I find really interesting, though, is that the way at least our Commonwealth government defines diversity is sort of very expansive. And certainly at the Attorney General's office, we consider lawyers to be diverse, not only if they come from, historically marginalized communities, but also if they represent sort of a specific human experience that citizens of the Commonwealth can relate to. So for example, lower income status or a single parent upbringing, or these are all elements of diversity. These are all things that make you unique. And the Attorney General's office, as well as a lot of other state and federal government agencies who are seeking to diversify their employee roles, I'm sure, look for folks that would represent and reflect the diversity of our country and our Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. And that could be diversity in a lot of different ways. So the bottom line in my experience is that your diverse experiences matter. And even if you don't think you have diversity because you don't have traditional diversity, perhaps, think about the ways in which you are unique as an individual, that you can bring a unique perspective to bear on the work of your employer, whether it's a state government agency, a federal government agency, or a private sector firm. Amplify that in your resume and your cover letter. Bring attention to how you are unique. Not only am I qualified, but let me tell you about how I can bring a unique perspective to what we do here. And I think that would be a really helpful way to sort of, amplify your own diversity, but also get your foot in the door for certain job opportunities that maybe otherwise would be, harder to get.
If I could build off of that, Joe, I think that's absolutely right. And I remember having this debate several times with people about sort of the diversity essay for law schools. And I never understood why 100% of people didn't submit diversity essays. It always is, oh, you don't want that extra chance to explain your viewpoint? It never made sense to me. But look, this moment, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk to this audience about this. This moment is about everybody getting in on DEI. All right. And if you don't feel like you're diverse, then get involved in the equity and inclusion side. Okay. Show your commitment to DEI initiatives. All right. Every firm put up on their website a banner in the wake of George Floyd saying, oh, we are committed to DEI. Not everyone's doing anything. All right. And some people just don't know what to do. And it would be great if a bunch of, I don't know, liberally minded kids that escape the purple bubble, that have an idea about improving the world, actually got their hands dirty and made it happen. And think about selling your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion if you don't feel diverse itself. You know.
Yeah, if I can follow that up, Justin, I think that's an amazing point, that it's on all of us right now to be active and take steps. And along those lines, it's on you, Williams grads and law students, it's on you to look for law firms and companies that actually care about these efforts. Lots of law firms will have some pretty page on their website and talk about their diversity, equity, and inclusion program, but talk to the associates you're interviewing with. Ask them, do you hear about it? Are there lunches? What kind of activities does a firm do? There's plenty of lip service out there, but then there are actually law firms and companies that take active steps and make true initiatives to make a difference in the world. And choose one of those if you can. If it's an opportunity for you that matches what you want to do, and it aligns with your values, try to choose one of those opportunities, because going there is just going to further those efforts. I know at our company, our CEO has always been really passionate about diversity. After everything that happened this summer, starting with George Floyd, he called together all of our senior directors and VPs, had everyone read the book Cast by Isabella Wilkerson, which is an incredible book. I highly recommend everyone read it. And then we talked about it, and then he got our HR team to give us a ton of resources on how to hire and keep diversity and inclusion in mind for our hiring practices. And we then took that training and disseminated it to our teams. There are lots of companies and firms that actually are passionate about this, and I think it's on all of us to try to find one of those to go and work at.
If I could also, I totally agree with that. And I know I'm just a moderator, but I'll jump in as well. I think one thing that is a thread that's gone through a lot of what we've been talking about is doing things that you're not necessarily comfortable with. Networking, maybe you're not super comfortable reaching out to 20 people. The kind of efforts that Justin and Emma and Joe and Jen are talking about also might not be comfortable to you, or that it might not come naturally, right? Like me personally, these were not things that were on my radar as personal priorities when I was 22 coming out of Williams, right? It just wasn't. And yet right now, 18 years later, it's something that is a big part of what I do at my firm, what I read personally, the effort, if an interviewee asks me, what do I do? I can talk to them about it, and it's probably the most excited I've been. So this can be something that I think all of us can think about as, stretching yourself as well. If you're, maybe you're not making the hiring decision, but you can join whoever you're joining and figure out what the opportunities are, and maybe, ask someone if they'd be up for something that you thought of, if nobody's out there talking about it. There's a lot of ways to go on this. And, just because it's not that easy, or it's something that you haven't done before or hasn't been a passion, don't feel awkward about maybe, getting involved, because it's the only way to start.
Josh, thanks for that. One gloss I would add to it, and it's just a change that I've seen over the past 12, 15 years in the legal world, is that historically big firms used to do pro bono for just a handful of reasons. Free training for junior associates and being able to advertise to prospective students and clients that they're doing pro bono. In the past year alone, you talk to any managing partner of any firm, especially in New York, who has a true commitment to pro bono, and the answer they will give you as to why they do it is because it's the right thing to do. And I think that is just a way of looking at the world that, this generation of lawyers coming up can heavily influence, because you're going to have people at the top of the food chain making decisions at law firms, at in-house, at any legal profession that you might work at, that might not know all of the different opportunities to give back to a community that you're privy to. And if you have an organization that is willing to put its money where its mouth is, you can bring those opportunities to them and say, hey, this might not be a traditional pro bono project of helping someone in lower income housing, secure insurance or do an educational appeal. But this is something that uses the skill set that we have as lawyers to give back to an underrepresented community in a meaningful way, rather than just being dismissed out of hand. I think most senior managers seeing that type of initiative from a junior employee would applaud your efforts. But one thing that does take, Justin, before I move on, I'll know you had a point.
Oh, so I want to, Josh, what you said reminded me of a point on inclusion that I would be remiss if I didn't say something about. There are communities where these skills that we're talking about, networking, raising your hand, advocating for yourselves, it hasn't been something that you were trained to do, right? And it is uncomfortable. And I'm not going to lie, as much work as can be done on the inclusion side, work has to get done on the other side to get you comfortable, to get you there. If you're not advocating for yourself, people aren't going to trust you to advocate for their clients. So one, build that skill for yourself if you feel like you don't have it. But on the inclusion side, on the other side, and this group, I've seen the graduation rates. Even if you're 3 to 5 years out, you can play a huge role in inclusion, right? And it ties into some of the things we've been talking about: the lunchroom table, the hallway conversation, being invited to lunch, being invited to coffee, right? There may be a struggling first-year associate down the hallway that doesn't feel like they have the right lunch group. That might feel like it's a bit of an old boys network that's become a little bit of a young boys network right above them, and that ceiling's getting set, right? So everybody here on this chain, whether you're just coming in or you've been in your position for a while, you can play a role, and look for those opportunities. There's a great phrase, and I'm going to ruin the quote, but that diversity is getting invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, right? Do your part. Ask some people to lunch. Ask to dance. It'll come back to you because that reinforces it's just network building. Okay.
I think that's right. And it actually leads directly into the next thing that I was hoping we could all talk about, which is, if you are looking for a job, if you are looking to make a career pivot, how do you learn about law? How do you learn about the substance of law? How do you learn about the business of law? And how do you do it now, when we are all working remotely, when all of the usual textbooks that partners who have been in the game for 30 years can tell you, oh, this worked for me back in the 1970s, simply don't apply right now. Most of us had experiences with this in 2008, where the law firm life and the legal community was just basically blown up because of the financial crisis. My roommate at the time started his first job right out of law school, only to be handed a pink slip a month later when his law firm collapsed. So all of this is real to a lot of people, but the novel difficulty facing everybody that's coming up in your shoes now is that you got to do it from the safety of your own desk, and you can't actually go out and physically meet someone for coffee. So how do you do it? And to kick it back to Joe Lucia, I think he had some interesting thoughts on where we could go with this. So Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So certainly I think one of the things that I've done more of than maybe most is utilize the networks that are available built into the legal industry in the form of bar associations. Bar associations are available at a variety of different levels. Of course, you have statewide bar associations, perhaps like the New York Bar Association or Massachusetts Bar Association. But you also have sort of more local bar associations. Here in Boston. We have the Boston Bar Association, or we have certain county bar associations in Western Mass. But there are also affinity bar associations that are very specific to the community of folks that would be members there. So I sit on the board of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. I've done that for 6 years now. You could also be a part of the Women's Bar Association or be a part of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. So there's all sorts of affinity bar associations that you might gravitate toward as well, where you can find folks that have similar interests to your own. Bar associations are not only great for networking because if they're good, they will have lots of social events. It's harder during the pandemic, but we still managed to throw them. And those are great things to sort of log on to in the pandemic world. You can log on to Zoom and participate in a name that tune situation. We can have games like that, or they do trivia contests. There's all sorts of things that bar associations are doing to think outside the box during this time to still unite its members and bring people together for purposes of networking. But bar associations also provide, as Joe was alluding to, a really great opportunity for learning substantive law or getting involved in certain areas of law, practices of law, with others that practice those areas. So if you're interested in making a pivot substantively and you want to sort of learn more about mass tort practice, or you want to learn more about IP practice, or you want to learn about bankruptcy practice, there's a committee usually that is organized within these bar associations that caters to that community of lawyers practicing in that area. So if you are a law student or a young attorney and you're looking to sort of learn more about certain areas of law, or meet people that practice certain areas of law, or just meet people in general that have certain similar interests to your own, bar associations are a really great option. And especially if you are in law school, I know that many bar associations are free to join. I know our Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association gets a lot of members that are in law school, and we don't charge them a penny. And they come and drink all of our wine at all of our events. So, so there's a lot of great options for socializing through these bar associations for cheap. And even when you become a young lawyer, if you're lucky enough to have a job straight out of law school, ask your firm if they'll pay for your membership in these bar associations, because a lot of firms will do that. So keep your network growing and building, and drink wine while you do it. That's kind of the rule that I would espouse.
I think that is good life advice in general. Justin, did you have any additional thoughts on this? I know you had told me beforehand that you wanted to contribute here.
It's hard to follow that. I think that's great advice, Joe. It's community building, and this has been the theme today of all of the statements. And it's community building in any form that it happens. And it happens in hundreds of different ways. This panel discussion being a great example. I found that I have reconnected with more friends from college, more friends from law school, more friends from high school now, because of everybody has Zoom. It's amazing. If you email 10 people, 6 of them will probably say, yeah, I could get on for a coffee, to have a glass of wine with you and just talk about things. And at the end of the day, that's networking, right? Like my law school friends, when we get together, it's a group of people that, we've now been practicing long enough. Everybody's well enough established in their career. But, if I was looking for business, that would be how I get done, right? If I was looking for a job, that's how it gets done, So take advantage of the opportunity now, right? It's a lot easier to hop on a Zoom or take a 10-minute phone call than it was to actually take 25 minutes out of my day so I could drive 10 minutes to have a 5-minute cup of coffee to drive 10 minutes back. So the opportunities are there, but they're there for the bold, right? And you have to step up and ask for it. And on the flip side, when somebody calls you looking for an opportunity to build their network, be glad about it, and be glad that you're getting that phone call and give back. But Joe is right. All of these places, any place you can get to meet people, right, and get to know them, right, it's just going to inure to your benefit over time as an attorney.
Totally agree with that. And I think one thing that keeps popping up is, if you ask, people will be very happy to meet with you, coffee, whatever, whether it's somebody who you work with, somebody who's, from your law school, an Ephs alum. People are more or less almost always happy to talk. People love talking about themselves, so it just takes reaching out, and maybe not ever, maybe 2 people out of the 10 don't respond, but you're gonna get some friendly responses for sure, on all these topics. So before we move on, just one reminder that we've got this Q&A function. We've got a couple in the queue, but we've got some time left to try to answer those. So if anybody else has any questions, please drop them in. So the first question, and I'll pivot to the Q&A here now, was whether anyone has any advice for 1L summer opportunities. And for me, this kind of brings me back to when I was looking for a job 1L. I knew I kind of wanted to do corporate transactional law, but that kind of a job wasn't very easy to get when you're just a 1L. So my advice to you is be a lot more open about what your 1L, internship will be than you initially think you will be. I interned with the ASPCA, right? I was in their corporate counsel's office. People brought pets to work. People fostered animals if they had a closed-in office. It was really fun, and the people who worked there were really nice. And I actually did some real substantive work there that I could use to sell myself the next summer, when I was doing OCI, right? I could talk about like, I'm interested in in-house work. I'm interested in how clients operate, and I've worked inside a big organization, and, I did this research and that research. Plus, I think one of the panelists said, maybe it was Justin talking about how everybody is diverse and, has something about themselves that makes themselves interesting. Your job is, to make yourself interesting. When you're drafting a resume, make your resume the one that people are going to say, like, I've been looking forward to talking to you all day. And for me, that was like, I worked at the ASPCA. I was working in Vegas as a restaurant manager. I was a cheesemonger. Like, I was the peach interview for everybody I met. And, by the end of it, I knew exactly how to do my elevator pitch because I had sorted out all these kind of funky parts of my history. So, I think when you're a 1L, most people are not going to have awesome experience. Not everybody's been a paralegal at Cravath, right? So figure out how to take your experience and use it to sell yourself, to make yourself interesting to whoever it is you're talking to.
Hey, Josh, can I piggyback on that? Because I know we have some current college students, like some people still at college possibly, and you may be thinking, let me rush straight to law school. I gotta tell you, now that I'm on the hiring committee at my firm and I'm sitting through all these OCI interviews, I find people who did something between college and law school so much more interesting, right? And when you put yourself, and later on, when you put yourself in a position of hiring people, there's sort of two questions that you basically ask, which is, can they do the job? Like, do they get it? And you get a lot of sort of measuring sticks for that. Well, where did they go to school, right? What was their GPA, right? And when you're looking at a resume for most people who are coming in sort of as second year law students, it's hard to distinguish between these people. I'm not going to lie. It really is. And so that's why people fall back to top 10% of the class, top 10 in the class, right? Because it's one of the only ways you can really distinguish people. Like, be distinguishing yourself, have a passion, right? I love interviewing paralegals. I love interviewing people that had restaurant running experience, because those are the people I know that can handle multiple tasks at the same time and get the job done. And then if you add to that the basic sort of, oh, well, do you have a JD? Did you go to a good undergrad? Did you go to a good law school? Those are the people that really distinguish themselves. If you come into any interview and you can say, hey, let me tell you why I'm here. Let me tell you why I'm excited to be interviewing for your company. I share your view of this mission. I have this passion, right? Now, look, that's hard sometimes to do in big law. I'm not going to lie. Maybe I'm saying that in a especially boutique practice that I'm in, knowing that that's sort of what we look for, But knowing yourself, taking agency over your life will help you take agency over your career. It will lead to longer term happiness and success. And for your 1L summer, if you can't get a firm job, it may be the best thing that's happening to you right now, right? This might be your last opportunity to really do something out of the box, something that's unlike anything you want. I spent a lot of time studying animal law rights in law school. Why? I have no idea. It was not necessary, but I did. Right? Find something that you are passionate about, and then sell that when you're in an interview, however you do it, down the road.
That makes a lot of sense, Justin, because you're ultimately selling yourself and marketing yourself and figure out a way to frame yourself for somebody who doesn't even know you at all. The next question maybe could be thought of in a similar way, and I'll offer just a couple thoughts and then see if any of the other panelists or moderator wants to jump in. The question was, do you have any advice for us interested in entering the New York market if we went to law school out of state? So look, I work at a New York firm now. Joe's worked at a couple of firms in New York as well. To be honest, so many of the people who work in the firms in New York, and I think Emma actually paralegalled here as well, they're not from New York. This is the least local market probably in the entire United States. So I think this is probably not something to stress too hard about, right? Wanting to practice law in the biggest legal market in the world, in arguably the most fun city in the world. Sorry, Joe, Lucia. It doesn't take a lot of explaining. Nobody's gonna ask you in an interview like why do you want to come here? They're gonna assume you want to come here because everybody wants to come here. But I think for what you do want to show is like, why do you want to do the kind of work that the firm does that you're interviewing with, right? Like if your entire resume says international development, working at the World Bank, Peace Corps, you need to go in and be ready to sell yourself about why that makes sense to now be a antitrust lawyer, right? That's what I had to do when I was kind of like, all right, so you know how to slice cheese and you worked as a Vegas restaurant manager, okay, so like, what are you doing here? And, but I was kind of ready with the pivot. And like Justin said, you talk about, your experience working with teams and, high performing situations, 12-hour days, like there's ways to sell whatever. And I think that goes for any market. I'm not sure if there's anything anybody would add about specifically to New York.
The one thing I would add, and it piggybacks off literally the last thing you said, is that New York is basically unique amongst US markets in that if you did pretty well in a pretty good law school, you can probably get a job in New York. There's a lot of jobs out there, and most people are transplants. A rule of thumb that I know a lot of big law firms use is the higher in the class you are, the more broadly they can look geographically from where you're from. But at least in my own anecdotal conversations with people, it's really other markets, Boston, Rhode Island, where my in-laws are from, Chicago, where unless you have some sort of a tie to that area, you grew up there, you have family there, you went to college there, it's going to be meaningfully harder to get a job. But in markets like New York and DC and LA, just being smart and being someone that you would actually want to work with is the coin of the realm.
That said, I think one challenge in New York, right, is just the sheer volume. So, I think you might have to be a little bit patient. So again, if you have connections and you have people in that market that you can just talk to, even if you don't want to work where they work, I think that's really helpful. But and certainly use the Williams network for that and others that you may have. But beyond that, I think New York can be a little bit daunting just because of the sheer number of companies there. And so I think that can be just one. If you're able to sort of narrow it down and just keep tracking companies or industries that you're interested in and refreshing their job postings again and again, then you might land where you want. But other than that, I think having worked in New York, I would agree with everything you said, Joe, of you can absolutely find a place there. That's great. It's just, it might take a little more digging than in a smaller market where you can tell really quickly what the 10 most desirable companies are or law firms are.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question. And so this is a pretty lengthy one, which I think I dismissed accidentally. The question was generally around how do you protect against your own implicit biases and tendencies when you're hiring, kind of selecting people to invite to the dance, as Justin put it. You might want to consciously make a shift towards inclusion, but the person asking the question said, he tried that and in one circumstance was accused of tokenizing. So how do you find the balance? And I think that's a tough question. I think it's a great question. Justin, I can see you almost look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was reading it. I read it back, read it. Kudos to you, whoever wrote that question about being diversity minded when building teams. You got to be. Sorry, business works that way. That's how the world is moving. I think it's moving in the right direction. I know my clients want to see more diversity in their representation. We do a lot of work with state pension funds. We do a lot of work with government agencies. They want to see that diversity. I don't think it's tokenizing, right? No more than you can look at President Biden's cabin right now and say it's tokenizing, right? And perhaps it's easier to say about Biden's cabinet because there are so many diverse people that it's hard to single anybody out as being the token. That said, sometimes diversity is hard to find. Sometimes diverse candidates are hard to find. Sometimes it's hard to get a recruiting message out. Sometimes you got to do things like when your friend Josh says, hey, can you hop on this panel discussion for a bunch of 03 grads? You get on and you say, hey, I'm looking for diverse candidates, right? It's hard for that person that maybe you're accused of being tokenizing by bringing them on board. But it's better to have that person than to have a team without any diversity at all. Okay. And if anybody says that to you, then say, I'll tell you from my perspective as a diverse candidate, I'd rather be called the token than unemployed. So whoever's making that observation, I think you could say good on them, learn from what I do, and because I'm doing the right thing. So don't worry about that. The point is to get more diverse, to be more inclusive. And I think that's really the way that we're really going to improve this profession, that we're going to improve sort of the world for everybody.
I can't think of a better note to end this on. And noticing that it's 4:01 p.m. according to my clock, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank all of the panelists here and my co-moderator for their insight, to the alumni office for putting this together, and for each of you attending for taking the time out of your day to participate. You should feel free to reach out to any of us with your comments or questions. We're all on LinkedIn, and I believe the alumni office is making our contact information available to everyone. Thanks once more, and I'm sure we'll all speak again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.